Fish will not be seen tonight, so that we may bring you the following special program from ABC News. Fish will return in 2 weeks at this time. This is an ABC News special report with Roger Grimsby in New York and Barbara Walters in Washington.
Good evening. 2 events last night and the aftermath today have dominated the news. New York City went totally dark last night, and tonight large parts of the city still are without power. And a U.S. Army helicopter strayed over the demilitarized zone between South and North Korea and was shot down by the North Koreans. 3 Americans were killed and a 4th wounded and captured. We'll tell you about that and about how the White House handled the potentially explosive incident later in this program. Today, the lights were coming on again in parts of New York City, and the citizens there are just beginning to calculate the tremendous cost in confidence and in dollars of last night's total blackout. We have several reports on that. First from New York, Roger Grimsby.
The clock stopped exactly 24 hours ago, along with just about everything else here in New York. The only lights were automobile lights, otherwise the Great White Way was pitch black. Broadway theaters and restaurants closed up while you could eat by candlelight. It was very difficult to cook by it. Thousands were stranded in the city when airlines, commuter trains, and subways were knocked out of service. Thousands of others, all ages, took to the streets just for the fun of it. After all, New York City gets blacked out only once every 12 years. And there were thousands of others who took to the streets to plunder and to pillage. Over 2,500 looters and vandals arrested during the first 8 hours of the blackout. Many more got away. The looters concentrated on small businesses, mostly in the poorer sections of the city, where unemployment and crime are chronically high. There were more than 40 serious fires. 2 firemen died. Some of the fires were deliberately set. Compounding the problem, false alarms, 1,100 of them. Mayor Beam summed it all up by calling it a night of terror. How did it all begin on one of the hottest, steamiest nights of the year in New York City? Well, to the north, towering thunderstorms jolted the rich suburb of Westchester County. Lightning knocked out transmission lines, setting off a cascading series of power station failures. And lights began flickering for 10 million residents in the metropolitan New York area. No lights, no refrigeration, no appliances, no air conditioning, no television, no elevators, and in some of the worst cases, no water. The city was closed down for the day. Things are now taking a turn for the better since it all began 24 hours ago. Don Farmer has details.
Right now, the power people tell us that they have restored service to at least 90% of the metropolitan area. But that still does leave several 100,000 New Yorkers sweating, many in the dark, many without water. But the good news is that things are getting better every hour. We are told just a few moments ago now that the power has gone out again in some portions of the city which had been restored to power earlier in the day. Part of Kennedy Airport is dark again, we're told, and at least 3 other neighborhoods in the borough of Queens are dark again. But the power company officials had predicted that might happen, the surge of power causing more power outages as the lights begin to flicker back on. But we can tell you now that things are getting better every hour. Most of the trains and buses and planes are running. They're in business, if not always on schedule. Most of the radio and television stations and newspapers are operating again. The electric company now says its educated guess, its hope is that full power will be restored to the entire New York area by midnight tonight. The political leaders already are into some hot arguments over who's to blame for all of this, but the worst of the real crisis seems to be over now. Still, this has been a miserable day for millions of New Yorkers. The problem which began last night did not burn off with the sunrise, and many of those people who could sleep, many of them could not, but those who could awoke to discover that there was more hot... The problems which began last night did not burn off with the sunrise. Many of those people who could sleep awoke to more hot, muggy weather and more troubles. The power had not been restored to at least half the affected area. And the troubles were compounded by the troublemakers, the looters, the thieves. By mid-afternoon, more than 2,700 persons had been arrested, most of them for looting. 1 policeman had been shot. As many as 78 policemen have been injured so far. And the fires roared into the dawn. 650 separate fires in the city by late afternoon. 2 persons died in them. More than 40 firemen were injured. But the peaceful people tried to maintain a tenuous routine, doing something silly, but needing to do something as they waited, frustrated. Others lined up to buy food and drink, whatever wouldn't melt or mold or spoil. And others toasted their troubles with that widely favored, short but sure cure, strong drink. And those who hardly ever worry about anything didn't worry about this. The water was for using for folks whose high-rise buildings need power to get water pressure in upper floors. But the children used it for playing. Satisfaction, not survival, was their concern.
Coping was demonstrated in a number of ways. We'll be talking about that. The harpist at the Met, when the lights went out, ad-libbed a solo rendition of Dancing in the Dark as the patrons filed out. There was a blind couple in one restaurant, quite amused at the difficulty everybody else was having. Taking advantage of another's disadvantage included sky-high prices for candles and matches, to say nothing of some cab drivers multiplying their meters. One of the sad commentaries was the fact that some people installed subways refused to leave the cars. The reason? They were afraid to walk on the darkened streets. The Bronx District Attorney canceled his news conference today. He was to have announced indictments on people charged with stealing power from Consolidated Edison. And just remember this. From now on, if you ask a New Yorker, where were you when the lights went out? Be prepared for the answer. Which time?
The heat, the pollution. You and your hair feel so bad. Come to a place where you can feel good again. Come to Clairol Herbal Essence Shampoo. The shampoo that gives you the spirit of wildflowers and herbs and the feeling of soft, sensuous, glowing hair. Clairol Herbal Essence Shampoo. For hair that makes you feel so good. We're still the one. We've been together since way back when. And this year's gonna be a winner, yes. We are still the one with something new. Still the one that's gonna see you through. You're still having fun, and we're still the one.
Coping was easy for some people who live in the right part of New York City. ABC correspondent Jim Mitchell has this people story from the crisis.
Because of the problems in New York, and we have perhaps no better way of illustrating them than what's just happening in our program, we're unable to bring you the portions from New York, but we will return to that shortly. And now we will turn our attention to the other happening today that caused so much fear and distress. First, just to continue here, President Carter today ordered a fast investigation into the causes of the blackout. The chairman of the Federal Power Commission, Richard Dunham, ordered the commission staff to report its findings within 2 weeks. And that's fast as investigations of this kind go. Earlier today, I talked with Mr. Dunham. Mr. Dunham, people in New York were not warned of this. It happened suddenly. Yet the first instance was at 8:30. Couldn't Con Edison have called the television stations and said, put out an alert immediately, tell people to turn off their lights, tell them to be prepared?
Barbara, I don't know to what extent they did or didn't do that. Their first step was, it was not done. No. Okay, I just didn't know that. The first step was attempted voltage reduction, and then that was not enough, and then it went on. I think they probably felt that they could meet the condition at that time, and then cascade.
Would you advise in the future, if something like this happened, the television stations and radio stations should be alerted so they could tell the public?
Yes, I think that's a very reasonable protective step that could be taken.
Do you think that Mr. Luce or Con Ed was in some way negligent?
Well, I can make no judgment on that. These are questions that I assume will be raised in the investigation. That isn't our primary focus. We're trying to find out exactly what happened.
You have some doubts?
Management, it may be a mechanical problem. There are no limitations to our investigation. The president said, find out what happened and what steps, and he did not limit that to any particular steps.
Is New York City more vulnerable than other cities throughout the country? This happened twice to New York.
Yeah, I think it may very well be the case because one of the difficulty in New York City, the fact that all the lines are underground, they're more difficult to get at, they're more difficult to service. Certainly the enormity and the complexity of New York City is unique in this nation.
Could this happen elsewhere?
Yes, of course, these situations, I suppose there's no way to absolutely guarantee total assurance that they will never happen. The extent to which it is first an act of God, a lightning strike, which then cascades. There's no way to prevent, that I know of, a lightning strike on the really tens of thousands of miles of transmission lines we have throughout the country, throughout the nation. So this type of thing can occur. For instance, recently, a similar situation occurred just a month or two ago in Florida, where a tripped over and there was an outage in a whole section of Florida Power and Light. We had an investigation on that. The problem, of course, there weren't the masses in that situation as occurred in last night.
Should it happen again? Answer, yes. Where? Anywhere in the country. What can be done to prevent another such devastating blackout? Several things. For example, by burying overhead power transmission lines, you reduce their susceptibility to lightning strikes and weather. But once underground, transmission lines are more costly to operate and maintain. Failures from cable breaks become far more difficult to find. With cables, a blackout might last even longer. It isn't sufficient to set up task forces to find out what really happened and then make blue sky recommendations. That happened back in 1965. The automatic system, which was aimed at preventing a total blackout, failed last night. That system should have resulted in selective blackouts in order to save the entire metropolitan complex. As Con Ed Chairman Luce declared, any system operated by machines that are made and controlled by men can and will fail at some point. Murphy's Law. If anything can go wrong, it will. And it did. What has shocked most New Yorkers and probably much of the nation is the looting that went on during the blackout. Especially bad during the dark, of course, but some brazenly continued it even in broad daylight. Hardest hit were the shop owners in the ghetto areas. In Brooklyn's Bedford-Stuyvesant area, police reported looters carrying sofas, rolls of carpets, television sets, anything they could lift. Women and children carrying goods from stores in plastic trash bags. Some shop owners attempted to guard their stores with shotguns, homemade spears, and clubs. In the South Bronx, a supermarket was burned out. 70 people were seen looting it. Harlem probably caught the worst of it. Block after block of small shops plundered and pillaged. One Brooklyn police officer said the looters swept through here like locusts. Over 2,500 looters and vandals have been arrested, about 80 police injured, and Mayor Beam demanded the guilty be punished to the full extent of the law. The looting and the violence are the biggest differences between this blackout and the one in 1965. As one angry detective put it, in 1965 you were dealing with human beings. Now we're dealing with animals, his quote. There's another big difference. This blackout hit only 10 million residents in New York City and neighboring Westchester County. The 1965 blackout hit 25 million people in the entire Northeast. We have black and white film of the 1965 blackout. The clocks had stopped at 5:28 on an afternoon in early November the last time. It was 12 years ago, the first time a blackout had ever happened. And to many people, it seems something of a lark, even though it, too, lasted all night. The next morning, Police Commissioner Vincent Broderick congratulated the city on its conduct during the crisis.
If we learned anything from last night, we learned that the people of New York are responsible citizens and that this is a great city and that it's not a crime-ridden city.
Jingle bell, jingle bell, jingle all.
Well, this time the blackout in New York has proven again that society's code of conduct is too often a very thin veneer, and that when imposed conduct restrictions are removed, the human animal is quick to revert to unacceptable behavior in order to satisfy his avarice or hate or both. Geraldo Rivera reports.
As you know by now, a terrible thing happened to parts of this city last night. When the lights went out, it began to devour itself. In an unprecedented explosion of violence and desperation and lawlessness, poor people who were ordinarily average citizens began turning on their own neighborhoods and consuming them. It was awful and it was uncivilized.
They came here, they've taken everything. She has nothing left at all. Everything's gone. Completely. This man is probably out of a job. There are two other men here who've been working here for many, many years. There's just nothing here. It's just gone. There have been people...
My whole store is a mess. Nothing on it. It's worth over $150,000. Now it's all gone. Now I have 12 people working here. Now they gotta go for unemployment. Myself, I gotta go send my family, the whole family, to the welfare department I don't want to even bother working or get a penny, you know. I just want to lay down in the bed, get my money from the welfare, and forget about work in the city.
They broke in here and took everything out through there.
How'd you get the money to get into business?
We worked hard for about 10 years to come up with the cash. Come up with the cash to open up the store and establish good credit and started bringing merchandise in.
It doesn't look like you got anything left.
No, nothing left. They took everything. Everything. And whatever, like I said, whatever they couldn't take, they broke. They destroyed.
Well, let me put it this way. How would you feel? How would you feel if you had a $15,000 or $20,000 loss that you can't recoup?
But on the streets right in front of the stores, they had earlier trashed and looted. Nobody was apologizing.
The system, so far, like the way things are with everybody on welfare, we ain't got no goddamn jobs and whatnot, right? The little bit that we got, for us, it was worth our while. Like, I feel like this. God closed out the lights for one night to let us have the opportunity to get back for all the times that we have been beat, for all the times that we have been oppressed, for all the months that we ain't got Pampers around this neighborhood for our kids behind. But we got Pampers now, baby. Now we got Pampers.
Tonight, thousands of tenement apartments like this one are filled with stolen merchandise and attempts at justification. Scotch, you got gin?
Yeah.
You got this Panasonic here?
Yeah.
This electric fan?
Yeah.
Chicken?
Yeah.
Pictures?
Yeah.
A stereo set? What's this? Where's this liquor store? Where'd this come from? Where'd this all come from?
I got that from a kid. He was coming down the block. I gave him $2 for it.
$2 for a case of vodka?
Yeah, last night. He's okay. He don't care. But there's no money out here.
More gin? What's this? And wine. All right.
I got some furniture from my house. You can see me in my house.
You mean the couch and the chair?
You know. So I got me a couple of quilts and whatnot. I got marble top tables in the crib. You know. I wish I could have got a color TV.
Okay. I want to know why you did it. Why did you take this stuff?
Because number one, I'm uptight. I don't have a job. I don't have any kind of money. You know, and when the opportunity came, I felt that it was something, man, that didn't just happen by fate. I felt that, you know, it was time for the people to get the money. I think God had a little something to do. The lightning bolt was something. I heard a lightning bolt flash hit and knocked out or whatever.
But I mean, what right do you have to take someone else's stuff, though? That's what I got to ask you.
They've been ripping us off for I don't know how long.
New York City has always been a city that at the same time was both very rich and very poor. Well, last night the very poor used the blackout as an excuse for an orgy of revenge and lawlessness. And one wonders whether this city will ever be the same again. From Burnside Avenue at 180th Street in the Bronx, I'm Geraldo Rivera, ABC News in New York.
Times of crisis tend to bring out either the best or worst of people, and in New York, as you see, it has been both. Another people's story, more pleasant. We try again for the report of ABC correspondent Jim Mitchell.
For 85-year-old Sonia Green, living without electricity has not been easy. But like most people in her East Side Manhattan neighborhood, she quickly learned to adjust. Mrs. Green's neighborhood is typical of those parts of New York which were without electricity the longest, a mix of high-rise tenements and small shops. The lack of an operating elevator was among the biggest problems faced by most residents here. Those living on the higher floors either had to stay isolated in their rooms or use the long and darkened flights of stairs, particularly difficult for the elderly. But for the small businessmen just around the corner on 3rd Avenue, the electrical stoppage was more serious. The neighborhood storekeeper did a big business in beer and soft drinks, but all his ice cream melted, and by mid-morning, his milk and other dairy products were on the verge of spoiling. But the hardest hit was a restaurant owner down the street. No electricity meant no refrigerators.
You have to understand, upstairs here, we have about 6 refrigerators, and all of that food is completely gone now. Chocolate mousse, lemon mousse, escargot, the seafood upstairs is gone. Things like that. We just had to dump it all out.
But despite all the hardship, the neighborhood was taking it all in stride. Water brigades were quickly set up between fire hydrants and apartment kitchens. 72-year-old Oscar Zaratsian thought nothing of frequent round trips to his room on the 24th floor, while other upper floor residents found ways to beat those long flights of stairs. But everywhere, people were helping each other. Like Mandy Lazar, with flashlight in hand, she periodically checked on other tenants in her building. One group of neighbors even felt there should be power outages like this one more often.
Last night was really nice. You see everybody coming out and helping each other and directing traffic, and people got no response, and we got together and started, talking, That's what this city needs now and then, something like that. Once a year, we should do this once a year.
But for most New Yorkers, it was a holiday, a time to gather in the street or to sunbathe on the rooftops. But most of all, it was a time not to get upset, to make the most of a bad situation. Jim Mitchell, ABC News, New York.
This is a testimonial for Tickle, the antiperspirant with a big wide ball. It's so effective at helping stop perspiration. So effective at helping stop odor. It's given people a unique way of saying it works for them. How do we know? If Tickle wasn't working, who'd be laughing? Staying drier is nicer with a little tickle.
It's Julie Andrews as thoroughly modern Millie, a single girl living it up in the roaring 20s.
What is your opinion of brute force, Mr. Green? Operator, you have obviously never been in a Chinese opium den.
With Mary Tyler Moore and Carol Channing.
I'm a jazz baby.
It's a thoroughly delightful, thoroughly modern Millie.
It was suddenly a serious, possibly critical situation last night when a U.S. helicopter used primarily for hauling cargo, like this one, was shot down after it wandered into North Korean airspace last night. It was serious enough to pull President Carter away from a state dinner and for the White House to brief reporters through much of the night. 3 Americans were killed and a 4th wounded and captured. Sam Donaldson tells us how the White House handled this touchy situation.
There was a reflexive gearing up for the worst at the White House when word came that an American helicopter had been shot down. But almost immediately, the signs pointed away from a real crisis. The president learned in his initial briefing that the helicopter had been downed over North Korea. It was evident that the North Koreans hadn't crossed the demarcation line themselves. So the White House tried to strike in its first statement a tone that was both sober and conciliatory. Deeply concerned, said the statement, but any penetration of North Korean airspace would have been unintentional and regrettable, said the statement. By dawn, the president was convinced that the American crew had made a tragic error, and he said as much, telling a group of senators that he wanted the North Koreans to understand that we knew that the mistake was made by the crew. We're primarily interested in having this incident not escalate, said the president. There really didn't seem to be any purpose in acting tough. And there was a danger that such action would give the North Koreans an excuse to initiate incidents all up and down the line. So, by tonight, Mr. Carter can claim that by keeping cool, gathering the facts, and avoiding tough action or talk, the matter, although tragic, may not provoke even more and deeper tragedies in the days ahead.
Any shooting incident near the demilitarized zone between the 2 Koreas can be dangerous, critical, or minor, regrettable, but non-explosive. We forget that North Korea and the United Nations, speaking for South Korea, have been negotiating a peace for 24 years. In that time of sporadic talking, there have been more than 2,000 shooting incidents, and 5 U.S. planes have been shot down, counting last night's. Irv Chapman tells us about the importance and danger of such events.
There's been a long series of incidents across the truce zone, not always involving Americans or aircraft. Those captured were often held for long periods, so they and U.S. officials admitted criminal guilt for espionage. In 1963, 2 helicopter pilots were brought down. 1968, the intelligence ship Pueblo and its crew of 83. 1969, an EC-121 airplane shot down. Later, 3 helicopter crewmen captured. Last year, 2 U.S. military guards killed attempting to trim a tree. Every time it happens, there's a threat of phenomenal escalation. 2 of Asia's biggest armed forces face each other. Men, tanks, and planes with a formidable armory of firepower and powerful allies to supply more. This is Irv Chapman, ABC News, Seoul.
Incidents of planes being shot down have occurred before in our history. But the point of the Korean happening is that a country can choose the way it wants to react to an incident. In a hostile atmosphere, the death of 3 American soldiers could provide the basis for the most intense and severe retaliation. But when it serves a nation's purpose, it can smooth out the affair. Call it an accident, a mistake, a lesson to remember. Roger?
Well, it's another hot and humid night tonight here in New York City. New York police are hoping for the best, but they're prepared for the worst. Governor Kerry has sent in some state troopers to help keep control of the city. We can report that 90% of the power is now back on in New York, and that might discourage some of the looting. But nevertheless, all preparations have been taken. In addition to the looting and the vandalism, there have been fires, one fire after another. The total is now 650 fires in New York City. And as a result of that, there have been 2 deaths, none of them firemen, but 40 firemen have been injured as a result of those fires. A blackout crisis like this in a city like this produces a combination of lunacy and larceny, heroism and histrionics. It also underlines urban America's close to total dependency on technology. There were no elevators, no refrigeration, no trains, no gasoline pumps pumping, no water, no lights. The utility calls the lightning cause an act of God. However, if one day our conventional sources of power, including electricity, run out, that will be an act of man. I'm Roger Grimsby in New York. Good night.
This has been a presentation of ABC News.
Waited through the long night. Dawn on the morning of July the 14th was a welcome sight. The blackness of a starless night was slowly illuminated by a bright sun. But the light of day didn't improve what we saw. It brought home the sickening reality that some New Yorkers had taken advantage of the city's blindness. They ran through the streets in an orgy of robbery and arson. It's impossible to describe the pandemonium on the streets of Harlem, the South Bronx, or Bushwick. But if you had driven with us that day, this is some of what you would have seen and heard.
two scenes of the looting Wednesday night and during the day on Thursday. 3,776 people arrested. Thousands more fled the gutted stores before police arrived. They paraded before television cameras with their loot. They laughed, joked, and danced in the streets. It was a holiday of lawlessness. Did they think about what they were doing? Did they feel any pangs of guilt? Jeff Kamen talked with several of the looters and some of their neighbors who said that they just held back.
The police came with 4 cars, right? They ran up on the sidewalk. They blocked the doorways off, right? I jump over 1 car, right? They tell me to hard. I tell them, yo, you know? I said, everybody else is still, and why can't I still?
What they wanted, that's all. They had to burn the place down. Now we got nowhere to shop. Nowhere to shop. You gotta go far. You gotta go all the way to Pathmark, and that's where.
Why was it that everyone was looting? Could somebody give me an insight into that?
They didn't want to give nobody no jobs. You know, the government said the city said they don't have no money, but they got money. So now, but nobody working. So this is 77. Everybody know that times is hard now. People, they want things. They want luxury, you know, furniture, clothing, and food. So this is the first opportunity to get it. So they're going to take it. You know, if I was out there myself, I would have got what I wanted too.
You were not among the looters?
No, I wasn't. Unfortunate.
How do you feel about it?
I feel it was bad. It was bad. It shouldn't be done. It was bad. I do not feel that it was bad. Everybody, if you want to loot, you're going to loot. That's right. Where you going to go shopping now?
Would you answer the question? Did you loot?
No.
You didn't?
I did not.
Where were you at?
You didn't loot. My brother did it. My brother did it.
You see?
The thing is, you did not loot if it was your own business. Because you know why? Because people loot. Man, to loot, to be looting, to get something for their own self. That's the way it works. That's the way it always going to be.
There's a word that I grew up with that I think everybody grew up with, which is called morality, which is knowing the difference between right and wrong. Now, what do you think about the morality of looting?
I really don't know. Well, see, my opinion is that, you know, the people around here, they poor, and they saw it, you know, and the cops, they didn't tell them, you know, when they first came through, they said, hey, you know, go ahead, you know, do it, you know.
You heard police officers say, go ahead and do it?
Right. They came through, you know, several times. They wasn't stopping the people, you know, because they was around here, right. It was too dark.
The cops came, and they parked the cars there, and they scared everybody out, and they cut out, because they were scared, too.
Lights went out at 9:30. And there was a dead silence for possibly 3 to 5 minutes, and suddenly a yell came up from the street. The sound of I guess it must have been 1,000 voices, just at a scream of exulsion. I don't know, really. And I said to Belle, my wife, the lights are out, and I think there's going to be hell to pay tonight. But then we didn't hear any more, and we didn't think any more about it until about midnight. And at midnight, we heard the sounds of feet in the street. You couldn't see the faces. All you could hear was the sound of feet running and the sound of and then the sound of glass being smashed or the storefronts being ripped open. The noise was frightening. The noise must have been like it was in Nazi Germany in 1932 when the stormtroopers invaded the homes of people and ripped them out. Here they were invading the places of business. This store wasn't hit.
What did you think while you and your wife were inside and you were listening to the sounds of what you thought were, I guess, the end of your business?
That all your years of work can be wiped out in a minute by just one kid with a milk box to throw through your window, or 5 kids to tear down the gate or to do the looting.
Why didn't you come down?
I think I was afraid.
Spanish Harlem has been good to me. I have no complaint about Spanish Harlem. I'm talking about the 10th of 1% that the mayor even said. The 10th of 1% that ruined this city. That went and made shambles out of all the stores here. It's a very small percentage. You can't judge East Harlem, New York, or any other city in this country by just a few handfuls of scum, and that's what they are.
Thank you, sir. Good luck.
But I think what we need is really, we got to have real strong leadership. Somebody who'll get these addicts off the streets and get these winos off the streets. I understand a cop can't tell a wino to get off the street because we're violating his right. that it's all right to have a wino and an addict to go all over, molest people, beg for money, and they can't be touched because their goddamn rights are violated. And what about our rights? Are we entitled to anything? What about middle America? Can middle America ever say anything? Can the average taxpayer say anything? 19 years, and I got a little mad today. After 19 years, I got a little mad. But I can't be mad at East Harlem. I can't be mad at the mayor. I can't even be mad at the president. Because this thing has been going on forever. And until we do something, I could see the city going downwards. But I'll reopen. God be willing, if I could get some money, I'll reopen.
Take out everything. I lost all my money. I worked about 10 years for this. I lost everything, as I can say. I don't have no insurance, no nothing. I have 3 kids, a wife. I lost everything.
40 years I put into this place. Why don't they call the National Guard out? I was here at 3 o'clock this morning. It was like a war, the Second World War. Italy was better than compared to this.
Well, when you got a lot of poor people that's got nothing, you know, they get a chance like this to take something, they're going to take it.
Do you think it hurts this community when something like this happens?
Well, it hurts everybody, you know, because you got these people now, they're worried about their business as to whether they can start again in a community like this. As to whether they're going to trust these people around here, I doubt it. The merchants, they're not going to trust these people after this. I wouldn't trust them.
This is your livelihood. It's all, you know, in the store. You know, all your money is in the store, and now it's gone. You know, and the neighborhood loses by it all also.
I think it's really disgusting, you know. It makes you really want to throw up when you look at what's happened. And we got to live here. It's no place for us to go.
From the morning after the blackout. Looting and arson erupted here minutes after the lights went out, continued all night and well into the following day. One looter said it was wild. Mobs roamed the streets, smashing windows, ripping out gates, carrying away groceries, clothes, furniture, appliances, whatever they could get their hands on, whatever they could carry away. Some even used cars and vans to haul away their loot. Dozens were arrested along Broadway, but the looters were too many, the police too few. This is Broadway today. Most of the businesses that were looted but not burned out reopened and have remained open. A few stores that were looted and burned did not reopen. Some merchants say the area will never be the same. Others say Broadway is fighting its way back. They all seem to agree on one thing. They don't want to be reminded of that day a year ago when the lights went out. The Tom, Dick, and Harry shoe store was one of several businesses along Broadway hit hard by looters.
Things took a while to calm down. But things have never gone back to normal. I don't know why. Maybe some people just don't want to come back to the area, but it has not been the same as far as business is concerned.
Who were the looters? According to one study, they were the criminally prone, the badly educated and unemployed, and the working poor. I talked with some of them.
When I walked in the store, I happened to cut myself on my wrist, and on my arm here.
Pulling up the gates, or?
Yeah, pulling them out. And just walking into the stores, and I just happened, you know, the glass just flying all over, so it came down on me, you know.
What did you get?
Well, I got me a stereo, clothes, a bicycle, a bracelet. I got over a lot of things, you know. I mean, I didn't want to do it like my brother said, but we seen everybody just break wild, so we just got up, we just went what they did.
Do you think if there's another blackout, the same thing will happen?
Yep.
The Manhattan skyline 1 year ago tonight. New York City blacked out by the electric failure. The only substantial light coming from fires. 1,000 of them, most the work of arsonists. Arsonists destroyed this building, which had been the home of the Levine Furniture Company for 35 years. Furniture, TV sets, everything was lost. 1 month later, the owners moved the store across the street. They had no furniture to sell, just a counter to collect installment payments. Now, heavily in debt, they have a new store. But 12 months after the blackout, they are still struggling to survive.
We have been hurt hard by the fact that so much money is outstanding, which we couldn't collect. And also, as a result of the fire, a lot of our records were burned up, and we lost contact with many, many customers, and we were unable to collect.
18,000 merchants suffered losses in the blackout. 80% of them were not insured. While 9 million people from metropolitan New York went without electricity, some for 25 hours, thousands of people rioted and looted. One policeman called it the Night of the Animals. Now, a year later, Congress is still investigating the blackout, determining if the nation's utilities require tighter federal regulation. What triggered the blackout? A federal report issued last week places the primary blame on Consolidated Edison, saying it was unprepared to deal with the crisis touched off by a severe thunderstorm. The report by the U.S. Department of Energy says the root cause of the Con Edison system collapse and slow restoration was a lack of management alertness, leading to inadequate preparation for emergencies. So, 1 year later, there is still a debate going on over why the blackout occurred. Con Edison denies responsibility, emphasizing instead the changes it's made to minimize another blackout. Could it happen again? With these scars plain to see, Con Edison says yes. James Walker, ABC News, New York.